I walked into Ruth's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon and immediately felt it. That heaviness in the air that tells you something's wrong before you can name what it is. Ruth was 76, sharp as they come, a retired English teacher who could still quote Yeats from memory. But she'd been calling me more often, forgetting our appointments, seemed confused about what day it was. Her daughter had asked me to keep an eye out for dementia. I looked around her living room, heavy curtains drawn, one lamp on in the corner, barely cutting through the gloom, stacks of newspapers she meant to read but never got to, the TV playing to an empty couch. I opened the curtains. She winced at the light like it hurt. Here's what her daughter didn't know. Ruth's confusion wasn't starting in her brain. It was starting in this room. I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched a senior's family agonize over cognitive decline, researching memory care, talking to neurologists, bracing for the worst, when what their loved one actually needed was more daylight and less clutter. Your environment isn't just where you live. After 60, it's actively shaping your mind, your mood, and your memory every single day. And most people have no idea how fast a home can go, from supporting you to stealing from you. I stood there in Ruth's living room and started noticing things. The clock on the wall had stopped weeks ago. Mail piled up on the dining table. She'd stopped opening it because the table wasn't a workspace anymore. It was storage. Her favorite reading chair faced away from the window. Everything in that apartment was telling her the same story. Stay small, stay still, stay confused. Her daughter was doing everything right from a medical standpoint. She'd scheduled the doctor appointments, researched supplements, started making lists to help with memory. But she came by once a week, usually in the evening, so she'd never seen what I was seeing. She didn't know her mother was spending 14 hours a day in near darkness. I asked Ruth when she'd last opened those curtains. She said she couldn't remember. Too much effort, and besides, the light hurt her eyes now. I asked when she'd last sat at her dining table to eat a meal. She gestured toward the couch, easier to eat there, watching TV. I asked if she still read. She pointed to a stack of books on the floor by her chair, said her eyes weren't what they used to be. Every answer was revealing the same pattern. Ruth wasn't losing her mind. She was living in a space that was slowly erasing her routines, her pleasures, her sense of time, and her brain was responding exactly the way a 76-year-old brain responds when it stops getting the inputs it needs. Here's what happens after 60 that most people don't understand. Your brain doesn't stop needing structure and stimulation and light. If anything, it needs those things more. But unlike when you were younger, your brain has less reserve to compensate when the environment stops providing them. A dark room isn't just gloomy. It disrupts your circadian rhythm, which affects your sleep, which affects your memory and mood. Clutter isn't just messy. It increases cognitive load every time you try to find something or move through a space. Isolation isn't just loneliness. It's your brain getting fewer reasons to engage, to remember, to care. Ruth's daughter thought she was watching for dementia. What she was actually watching was environmental decline that looked exactly like cognitive decline. And the tragedy is, I've seen this pattern dozens of times. Families focusing on the brain while the home does the damage. But it's not just your mind that your home is affecting. Let me tell you about James and the fall that changed everything. I cared for a man I'll call James. I use a different name to protect his privacy. He was 68 when I started working with him, recovering from a minor stroke. Sharp mind, good mobility, lived alone in the house he'd owned for 30 years. His kids lived out of state but called regularly. Everyone thought he was doing fine. I did a home safety check the first week. It's something I always do, walking through the space, looking for hazards. I found them everywhere. Throw rugs in the hallway that bunched up when you walked over them. Extension cords running across doorways to reach outlets on the wrong wall. The bathroom had no grab bars, no nightlight. The hallway between his bedroom and bathroom was dim even in the daytime. The overhead bulb had burned out, and he hadn't replaced it because he'd need a ladder. I pointed these things out. James laughed it off. He'd lived in that house for 3 decades. He knew where everything was. He could walk it in his sleep. 2 months later, at 2 in the morning, he did exactly that. Got up to use the bathroom, didn't turn on any lights because he didn't want to wake himself up too much, caught his foot on an extension cord, went down hard, broke his hip, lay there for 45 minutes before he could reach his phone to call for help. The recovery took 6 months. Hip replacement, physical therapy, loss of confidence he never fully got back. But here's the part that matters. James didn't fall because he was old. He fell because his home had become an obstacle course and he'd stopped seeing it. This is the cascade I've watched happen. Your home starts working against you in small ways. A rug that shifts, a cord you have to step over, lighting that's dimmer than it used to be. At first, you adapt. You step carefully, you hold the wall, you move slower, but every adaptation costs you. You're using mental energy to navigate hazards instead of living freely in your own space. You start avoiding certain rooms, certain activities, because they've become too difficult. Less movement means less strength. Less strength means more danger. More danger means more fear. More fear means more isolation. And your family doesn't see it happening because it happens one small compromise at a time. I see it because I'm coming in fresh. I notice the path you're taking from the couch to the kitchen has gotten narrower because you've moved furniture to create handholds. I notice you've stopped using your upstairs bedroom and started sleeping in the recliner. I notice the things you've stopped doing because your home no longer supports them. After James got out of rehab, we fixed everything. Removed every throw rug, didn't matter how pretty they were. Rerouted electrical cords, added outlets where they were actually needed. Put motion sensor nightlights every 10 feet between his bedroom and bathroom. Installed grab bars in the shower, next to the toilet, along the hallway. Replaced every dim bulb with bright LEDs. He told me later it felt like living in a different house. Not because it looked different, but because he could move through it without thinking. He could get up at night without fear. He could walk from room to room without planning his route. His home had gone from something he had to manage to something that supported him. The fall took 6 months of his life. The fixes took 2 days and cost less than $500. Here's what surprised me most, though. Sometimes the people trying to help are actually making things worse. I learned this from Dorothy. I cared for a woman I'll call Dorothy. I use a different name to protect her privacy. She was 81 when I met her, living alone after her husband died, fiercely independent. She'd been a caterer for 40 years. Cooking wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. When I started working with her, she'd stopped cooking. Her daughter thought it was grief, or maybe early stages of dementia. She'd hired me to help with meals, medications, light housekeeping. I asked Dorothy about it my second day there. Why had she stopped? She had a beautiful kitchen, good appliances, everything you'd need. She walked me through it, and I started to understand. Her daughter had reorganized everything 6 months earlier, trying to help. Put the everyday dishes on a higher shelf because the matching set looked better there. Moved the spices to a drawer instead of the rack by the stove because it was more modern. Bought her a new food processor to replace the old one. Didn't realize the old one was the only machine Dorothy knew how to use. Added a bunch of gadgets that were supposed to make things easier, electric can opener, automatic stirrer, things like that. But Dorothy didn't know how they worked and felt stupid asking. The kitchen had gone from Dorothy's domain to a puzzle she couldn't solve. Every time she thought about cooking, she'd get overwhelmed trying to remember where things were or how to use them. So she stopped trying. Her daughter meant well. She'd spent a weekend making the kitchen look better, work better, trying to set her mom up for success. But she'd done it based on what she thought was helpful, not on what Dorothy actually needed. This is the mistake I see constantly. Adult children treating their aging parents like problems to solve instead of people to ask. They see a safety issue and they remove it without discussion. They see clutter and they clean it without checking if that clutter has a system. They update and improve and modernize, and they accidentally strip away the autonomy and competence of the person they're trying to help. Dorothy didn't need a prettier kitchen. She needed her kitchen back. We spent an afternoon undoing most of the changes. put the everyday dishes where she could reach them without stretching, returned the spices to the rack where she knew they lived, packed up the gadgets she didn't want, found her old food processor in the garage and cleaned it up. I asked her daughter to come over, and I watched Dorothy show her where everything needed to be and why. Not because her daughter was wrong to want to help, but because helping has to start with asking what's actually helpful. Within a week, Dorothy was cooking again. Small things at first: scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, then soup, then her husband's favorite pasta dish. Her mood shifted completely. She had purpose again. She was competent again. She was herself again. Her daughter called me a month later, crying, thanking me. She'd had no idea what she'd done. She thought she was making life easier. She didn't realize she was making her mother feel incompetent in her own space. This is the tension, and it's real. Safety matters. Some things do need to change. But there's a difference between helping someone and taking over for them. There's a difference between making modifications with them and making modifications to them. If you're a family member watching this, trying to figure out how to help, here's what I want you to know. Your parent doesn't need you to fix everything. They need you to ask what's hard, what's not working, what they wish was different. They need you to make changes with them, not for them. They need you to respect that this is still their home, their life, their competence, even if some things need to be different than they used to be. And if you're the senior watching this, trying to hold on to your independence, here's what I want you to know. Asking for environmental changes isn't admitting defeat. It's the opposite. It's refusing to let your home become the thing that limits you. You've earned the right to have your space work for you. If you're finding this helpful, I'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. I share insights from my 15 years of working with seniors every week. So if a home can hurt you without anyone meaning it to, can it also heal you? I've seen it happen. I cared for a man I'll call Robert. I use a different name to protect his privacy. He was 73 when his wife died. They'd been married 51 years. The grief nearly buried him. When I met Robert 3 months after her death, he was spending 16 hours a day in his recliner, barely eating, not answering the phone. His daughter had hired me because she was terrified he was giving up. His home had become a shrine to absence. Everywhere you looked, there was evidence of her. Photos, her reading glasses still on the side table, her coffee mug in the dish drainer. The rooms echoed. Robert said it felt like living in a tomb. I'm not a therapist, and I didn't try to be, but I know something about environments and what they do to people. I asked Robert what he'd loved doing before she died. He said they'd had a garden together. Tomatoes, herbs, flowers. She'd loved flowers. But the garden was in the ground, required kneeling and bending and work he didn't have energy for anymore. I suggested container gardening, just a few pots on his patio, something small, something alive to tend. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he let me buy the supplies. We planted tomatoes, basil, marigolds, nothing complicated. I showed him how to water them, where to put them for sun, told him I'd check on them when I came by. The first week, he barely touched them. I'd water them myself. But the second week, I arrived and the pots had been moved. Better sunlight, he explained. Third week, he'd added a pot of mint, said he remembered his wife making tea with fresh mint. It sounds small. It was small, but those plants gave him something living to care for, a reason to step outside. A routine that wasn't about grief. The tomatoes started setting fruit, and he got excited, started researching how to support the vines. The marigolds attracted butterflies, and he'd watch them while he had his coffee out there in the morning. 6 months later, his patio had 20 pots. He was eating regular meals again, had reconnected with a friend from church, started driving again. The house still had photos of his wife everywhere, but it wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a place where life continued. I'm not saying a tomato plant cures grief. I'm saying your environment can either reinforce decline or interrupt it. Robert's home had been telling him the same story every day. Everything's over. Stay in the chair. Wait. The garden started telling him a different story. Things grow. Tend them. Tomorrow matters. So let me give you the specific things that make a difference. Because this isn't about theory. It's about what actually works. First, light. This is the most important thing and the easiest to change. Open your curtains first thing every morning. Get 30 minutes of morning light. It resets your circadian rhythm, which affects everything: your sleep, your mood, your mental clarity. If you have mobility issues and can't reach the curtains easily, ask someone to help you set up a routine. Maybe a family member who stops by, maybe a neighbor, maybe hire someone for 15 minutes a day. Replace dim bulbs with 100-watt equivalent LEDs in the rooms where you spend the most time. Add motion sensor nightlights along the path from your bed to the bathroom. You should never have to navigate your home in darkness. Second, the 3-foot rule. Everything you use daily should be within 3 feet of where you normally stand. Your medications, your glasses, your phone, the remote, a glass of water, nothing you need regularly should require bending below your knees or reaching above your shoulders. I've watched seniors stop taking medications on schedule because the bottles were in a cabinet they couldn't reach comfortably. I've watched them stop reading because their glasses were across the room. If something's hard to access, you'll eventually stop accessing it. Rearrange your space so daily living is easy. Third, clear paths. Remove every throw rug, and yes, I mean every single one. I don't care how pretty they are or how long you've had them. They're a tripping hazard and they're not worth it. Tape down or reroute electrical cords. Nothing should cross a pathway. Arrange your furniture so you have wide, straight paths between the rooms you use most. Here's the test. Can you walk from your bed to your bathroom in the dark safely? If not, something needs to change. Fourth, the one surface rule. Choose one surface that stays completely clear. Maybe it's a section of your kitchen counter. Maybe it's your dining table. Maybe it's your bedside table. That surface becomes your visual rest, proof that you're not buried, proof that you have control. It protects against clutter creeping back in. Fifth, the living thing requirement. One plant, one bird feeder outside your window, one fish tank. Something alive that you're responsible for. It creates routine, gives you a reason to engage, connects you to something beyond yourself. It doesn't have to be complicated. A pothos plant in water on your windowsill works. Watching birds at a feeder works. The point is something living, something changing, something that says life continues. After we made these changes in Ruth's apartment, and it took less than a week, everything shifted. We opened the curtains and created a morning routine around light. We cleared the dining table, and she started eating meals there again instead of on the couch. We moved her reading chair to face the window, put a bright lamp next to it, organized her books on a small shelf she could reach. We replaced the stopped clock, set up a simple system for mail, added a spider plant on the kitchen windowsill. Her daughter called me 2 weeks later. Ruth had canceled our appointment because she'd made lunch plans with a friend she hadn't seen in months. A month after that, Ruth called me herself to say she'd finished 3 books and started volunteering at the library again. The confusion her daughter had been so worried about, it didn't disappear completely. Ruth was still 76, still had normal age-related memory changes. But the fog lifted. The sharpness came back. She was herself again. Her daughter asked me later, almost crying, why no one had told her this mattered so much. Why every article about dementia talked about brain health and supplements and puzzles, but nothing talked about daylight and clutter and routine. I didn't have a good answer for that, except to say we're so focused on what's happening inside the body that we forget the body lives somewhere. And where it lives matters more than we think. I want to go back to Ruth for a minute, because what happened next matters. 6 months after we made those changes, I stopped working with her regularly. She didn't need daily support anymore, but I still check in sometimes, and her daughter still calls me with questions. Last month, her daughter told me Ruth had started painting again, something she hadn't done in 5 years. Watercolors, mostly flowers, and landscapes. She'd set up a small table by the window in her living room, the same window we'd opened those curtains on that first afternoon. The curtains stay open now. Ruth says she needs the light for her painting, but I think it's more than that. I think she finally understands what I was trying to tell her back then, that light isn't optional, that your space shapes your mind, that small changes create room for life to return. Your home should support your life, not shrink it. That's what I've learned in 15 years of doing this work. I've watched homes steal people's confidence, their routines, their sense of self, and I've watched simple environmental changes give all of that back. If you're a senior watching this, you're not asking too much by wanting your space to work for you. You're not being difficult by saying something needs to change. You've lived long enough to know what you need. Trust that knowledge. Ask for help making it happen. If you're a family member watching this for someone you love, environmental changes are love in action. They're easier than you think and more powerful than you know. You don't need to renovate. You don't need thousands of dollars. You need light, clear paths, thoughtful arrangement, and the humility to ask what's actually helpful instead of assuming you already know. You don't have to wait until there's a crisis. You don't have to wait until someone falls or gets hospitalized or stops functioning. You can make these changes now while there's still time for them to matter in the daily texture of life instead of just preventing disaster. Ruth's apartment taught me that. The darkness taught me what happens when we ignore environment. The light taught me what's possible when we pay attention. Your home can be the place that holds you up. I've seen it. Let it. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other.